Hey, my name is Erick, your host of Our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. Welcome to another episode. A few of the titles and adjectives used to describe this episode's guest, Ajamu X, include photographer, archivist, curator, sex activist, and Trekkie. Ajamu is a British-based international fine art photographer whose work explores same-sex desire and the Black male body. Ajamu's work has been shown worldwide in museums, galleries, and alternative spaces in countries like Brazil, Canada, South Africa, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and other countries. These locations also include Sweden's Gothenburg International Biennial for Contemporary Art and the UK's new exhibitions of contemporary art. Ajamu takes ownership of Black queer sexuality, using his camera lens to showcase our wants, needs, and desires through works like 2021's Reluctant Voyeurs, 2020's Portraits and Nudes, and 2016's Dicks, which I had heard of before. He's also been profiled in the British Journal of Photography, Another Magazine, and Art News Africa. A few months ago, Ajamu and I had a great video chat where I picked up on his creative intensity. I don't profess to be Snow White. That being said, I sense I'm going to learn a thing or two during our conversation. I'm excited, maybe a little nervous, and a good way to learn more about who Ajamu is and how his career as a cultural visionary utilizes his intellects and talents for highlighting and celebrating Black queer sexuality. Hey, Ajamu, and welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me. You've been one of those public figures that I've known about for a while. And so I'm just really honored that you took the time out to come onto this platform and just share who you are and your greatness.
Thank you very much. And there was no need for you to be too nervous, but maybe a little bit nervous. Yeah, that's fine.
I love that. A little bit doesn't hurt, huh?
You'll be fine.
It looks like you're in your studio. Are you working at the moment?
Yes, I'm got some new nudes that I'm working on. I've been in this studio space since 2021, located in Brixton, South London, which is where I also live.
You're one of a few people that I've been fortunate to meet who make Brixton your home.
Brixton is the center of the world.
And how so?
It has an amazing, diverse Black history, an amazing, diverse Black queer history. When I walk through Brixton, I'm walking through Harlem, I'm walking through downtown Kingston, I'm walking through Lagos. It's one of these places that's very familiar to lots of people around the world. Mm. And there's this energy that draws lots of us as artists, activists to Brixton.
Are you from Brixton? Is that where you're born and raised?
No, I actually was born and raised in the north of the country, a small town called Huddersfield. It's probably about 4 hours drive north. And then from there, I then moved to Leeds. And then like most of us who were born in small towns, we have to run and leave those small towns in order to breathe and to create and to reimagine other kind of ways of being. So I came to London in 1998, but my turning point was in 1987. It was the Black Gay Men's Conference, and that took place, the first and only National Black Gay Men's Conference, in October 87. I met artists and activists. And then by the January, I had left Leeds to come and live in South London, Peckham, and Twine, Brixton.
Okay. So it sounds like you've been connected to the community for a good amount of time.
I am one of the blocks, so to speak. Brixton it speaks to me on so many levels, just because of the amazing folks who I kind of know here, grown up with in Brixton.
I just remembered I need to give a shout out to Troy Fairclough and Reverend Jide McCauley.
The
Yeah.
Reverend Gideon Macaulay, Mark Thompson, some amazing folks.
Mark too, because they all suggested that I contact you. So yeah, thank them all.
They're better. They're better.
Well, we're recording on a Wednesday, early afternoon. How's your week been so far?
So far, it's been good. I'm doing research, shooting some work, shooting some new nudes, planning my next book project. Next week, I spend 3 days with my printer, print my next work for my upcoming show, and that opens in June. So that's the space that I'm in.
Are you able to talk about your current project, the one that you're shooting right now?
The current project is called A Sensual Chorus of Gestures, and it's a series of nudes with male bodies, female bodies, trans bodies. What I'm always kind of curious about is how do we as Black queer folks actually talk about being in the moment of pleasure, in the moment of being intimate. For me, the body makes these gestures that we are just not conscious of. This time links to the previous work, Reluctant Voyeurs, in which I was capturing the faces of many men at the moment of orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
So then this work, dealing with those gestures, we are just might not be aware of in the encounter of a sexual act, so around touching, and the work is a platinum print. So over the last 5 years or so, I've gone back to traditional 19th century printing processes. A lot of my thinking is around how do we talk about production and process as opposed to representation, which I think that lots of Black and brown and queer work is locked into that framework. So as an artist, I'm more concerned about process and making something actually in the context of the darkroom. I touch the chemicals, I touch the paper, those things also touches me back. So then actually, for me, the body is still front and center when we engage with process. So a lot of my thinking is about kind of asking these other questions around a queer artistic production that accounts for pleasure in making and thinking as well.
Okay. I want to ask you a little bit later about the technical part of it, because that's something I kind of picked up on. Is for me as a layperson, it's confirmation that there's more to the art of photography than just picking up a camera, especially nowadays with our smartphones. I think most of us assume that we have that gift, but I know there's much more to that. So yeah, I want to ask a little bit about the technical part of it. But when you touch on like the sensuality or the moments of, it sounds like ecstasy or those types of things, that's intriguing. Well, you are an archivist, but we know a lot about Kenzie and all the work that was done during that time. So would you put your work in some ways in that same camp?
Not necessarily Kenzie and the amazing work that he collected then was still locked within a sociological framework. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the danger of trying to unpack sex or pleasure is that people find it easier to attach it to something to make sense of it. But actually, I'm far more curious around talking about sex for sex's sake, and that's it, the thing itself. So then once again, I am kind of come from that school, is that there's these other questions, I think, that we don't kind of ask around the queer body. So then for me, a lot of the conversations is locked around what is done to queer bodies. We have to never lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm saying, well, actually, what is it that we also want to be done with and through our own queer bodies also? There is a reluctance to talk about sex and pleasure in terms of the archive. For me, there is a question around what kinds of spaces gets excluded from when we talk about Black queer heritage and history. And then usually it's your sex spaces. your cruising grounds gets excluded. Your sex parties, your bathhouses, your stripper clubs, your stripper bars, your kingsters. These are spaces that we come together in the context of the sexual and then build friendships, communities. They get sidestepped. So then actually, for me, in terms of the archive, I'm far more excited by not what is included in the archive, but what gets excluded, and then what are Black queers excluding from when we talk about Black queer experiences. So then I am kind of coming from that kind of angle.
I mean, just in hearing what you're saying, just for myself on a personal level, your work can help me with continuing to work on sloughing off the shame just about being queer in general, Black sexuality in general, because of its sometimes negative connection to the larger society. And then I heard some time ago, a straight woman, Black, she said, why are we going to the church, to these old church women to give us tips on sexuality? I'm pretty sure they don't know about their own.
This is true, but then also, I think for queers, or for some queers, the church is also a rhyme informal cruising ground too. So I think that there is a reluctance trying to talk about churches a cruising ground. Straight folks go and meet their future wives and da-da-da-da-da. Queers do it too. So then there's these other layers that we don't kind of get into. It's because it doesn't quite fit this almost this clean and tidy, respectable narrative that we're trying to convey as queers. So I am then far more excited by those dirty, mischievous queers who don't quite fit these images. That for me, I find far more pleasurable and exciting is those other stories, those folks who don't quite fit. I will then bring your Black nerds in there, your Black geeks in there, your Black folks who then do cosplay. All of those bodies don't quite fit. So the church is an interesting cruising ground. I'm just saying.
I've heard that.
From my limited experience with church boys, sometimes the best sex with church boys is because of that intense, that repression. And then there's a way that it's got to release itself. So then all of that comes with it.
One of the things like I said, I was nervous about, but it's not anyway in a bad way, is, I always have my questions for me, but I feel like this needs to be a bit more organic because of the work that you do. I was going to ask the generic question, what sparked that interest? But yeah, what sparked that interest? Because was it not seeing any types of those representations when you began your career as a photographer?
Part of the work is about me. I'm speaking back to a younger Ajamu who came from that small town. So actually, what would happen as a 17-year-old in a small town if I saw images of out, Black, proud, gay men?
Okay.
And that basically, for me, during the 1970s, early 80s, all of the images of gay men were white gay men. And those white gay men were always very effeminate, almost asexual. And then your Black men were always your sports stars, your drug pushers. So then actually, I could then not relate to that kind of hard edge imagery of Black men neither. And the first space that I saw Black men with other Black men were in African American pornographic magazines. So then actually, one level, these images affirmed what I was feeling and thinking. And at the same time, a lot of the images were problematic, especially around the racist language that was around the images of Black men in these magazines. So a lot of my work then starts from that tension. And then the thing to talk about sex and pleasure was just because I just got bored of some of the sex I was having then. Once again, a lot of my work starts from experiential, so then actually it's the sexual encounters and experiences that builds the theory that I'm talking about, and then not the theory placed onto my sexual practice. So then actually that's how I then started to try and think about the body. But then also the work is about what are the images that I still need to see around Black queer bodies. My work is still about creating what I need to see. But also it's about just I'm having other kinds of conversations around sex, pleasure, erotica that I think is kind of missing, especially if you are born and raised in a country like the UK, not just for queer artists, it is any artist or creative, Black, white, straight or queer, who does work around the erotic body will find challenges in the context of the UK. And a lot of the thinking then draws from Audre Lorde, Essex Sensual, Samuel Aleni. These are the folks who was then writing around the erotic in ways that was kind of more exciting, more edgy, far more progressive. That's where I then pull from and then bring in my take on that as well, and then just mix it all up and then put out a whole range of works. That's why I am still in my studio, still creating work, and then just having all kinds of dialogues.
My perception too is it's like it's taking ownership in your own words and your own images, because when you reference African-American pornography, or I remember when I came out looking at the gay rags, and a friend and I had a conversation about this years ago, this kind of guilt in not wanting to look at those imageries because it didn't seem like it was for us. A lot of times it just seemed problematic to me.
Well, I think that there is a bigger question around, I'm not sure if pornographic imagery should be politically correct.
Okay.
I think it's because it's problematic that we're drawn to it. That is how desire works. And we are pulled to things that we feel that we should not be looking at or engaging with.
That kind of, in a roundabout way, I think ties into, because, you sent me a few pieces and then also doing my own due diligence. But one of the ones that, for me, as a creative, again, because I like your work, because like you said, it challenges me. You photographed Jason Okundaye, the Black British author, for the article, Douglas Greenwood's article in spring edition 2024 of Butt Magazine. This person who is a conventional writer, but there was a talk about his sexuality in this article, and I guess it's more three-dimensional view of that person.
He's a sexy-ass brother who writes beautifully. My work is about capturing what I find sexy. Once again, I don't make any apologies around what turns me on about a person in front of my camera. In terms of the studio work, I draw upon the energy that people also bring into the studio. Then that's what I create from. It's not just about representation, but it's what else is going on that's not locked into that conversation.
So is it okay to say if I came in for a photo shoot, I may not have had that on the table, but that could be something that would, based on whatever energy is in the room at the time, encouraged?
I am kind of all for respecting people's limits and boundaries, but I also like to push people's limits and boundaries.
Right.
And some people come into the studio and they might feel shy or nervous. That is understandable. And I think that even with that, it doesn't mean that people are less sexy. It's just another energy. I then hope that in my studio, people do feel relaxed to and then just open up and then allow both of us to and create something. I do have another archive. People will never see private images of people who've come to the studio. We've created all kind of sexual work. That work is for them and them only, not for exhibitions or magazines or journals. So you and will be fine.
Okay. um, one of the things when I was doing my due diligence on you, and these were adjectives for me, would describe your work, your essence and your energy is pleasure, sensuality, sexuality, eroticism, and ownership. Yeah, I do think it's revolutionary.
I am not sure it is. That word is so loaded. It's probably more about playing with boundaries and limits. I've kind of always been mischievous anyway. So then actually, that's kind of more my politic. It's more about seeing how far one can go. So the reason why I push back against that word is because I'm very mindful how people can put these words and ideas onto the work, and the work just might not be that. So then once again, it's about kind of like ownership, about me kind of like owning my work as much as possible, because then I also know that once the work is in the world, it is then no longer my work. And also, I'm just mindful that people could put things onto the work that is not even about the work. I think that the viewer has to also be very aware of what they bring to the work.
Or me as the viewer, maybe just stay in the moment as much as possible. Don't try to dissect it or overthink it.
People have the need to interpret the image, but then sometimes those things might not be there.
Okay. What is your studies around photography, or what is your educational background?
I started photography in 87 in Leeds and then dropped out after the first terms. So I am mainly self-taught as a photographer. As a young kid, there was always a camera around the house anyway. I have these memories doing family portraits with a photographer called Mr. Chin. He did weddings, funerals. For me, there was always something about waiting for those 2-3 weeks for when he would come back with this thing called the photograph. I was fascinated by this piece of paper. So that I am not saying that that's where everything started from, but I'm saying that there's earlier memories of photography that still intrigues me. So that's why I love the darkroom as a space to work in. Once again, it's that sense of waiting for the image to appear. I still get excited by the magic alchemy of being in the darkroom. Process is key to my practice, in some cases, much more than the photographic image itself. It's a process that excites me more.
I hear a lot about digital photography. Are you in the minority now because of going back to the darkroom?
I think that the question around analog versus digital is a false binary. The reason why I say that, when you had the first photograph in 1826, the word on the street was painting is dead. That's not true. Analog is dead. That's not true. So then, once again, for me, it's more about where people are placed in relation to analog. And then also for most of us who then work with 19th century printing processes, actually, there are hybrid processes. Every new technology creates new kinds of conversations. Every new generation think that actually its moment is the best moment. So then actually, I don't really care what the medium is that people are using as long as it's photographic. I would say that for me, one of the differences is that with your digital technology, because you cannot touch it, there is a different intimate relationship that you might have with analog. Touch and texture, those kind of things. And then also, I think that with your digital technology, I think that people see images, but I am not sure that people look at images. I think there is always going to be a fear around new technologies. New things can be also generated from this moment of AI, as with digital, as with analog, as with painting, as with cave paintings. I think it's still part of the same continuum.
I've been one of those people walking down the hill with my pitchfork, like, what is this AI?
Yeah, it just allows us to ask other kinds of questions. And for me, then the fear is I'm not necessarily AI. It's on how people use the technology and for what purpose.
You kind of hinted a little bit at your life before who we know of you today. Yeah, you hinted about growing up in a small town. So what was life like then, and who were you?
Oh my God. Who was I then? That's an interesting question. For me, I come from a very tight-knit, supportive family. Lots of summers with my grandparents, because then my grandparents came to the UK around 58, 59. And then they came to a town called Bradford. And then my parents came in 61 to Huddersfield. And so basically, Huddersfield is one of those towns whereby everybody knows everybody. Growing up as a young teenager, coming out of that post-punk moment, so then I was then one of these Black kids, and that would, walk around with mascara and nail varnish and tucker boots and being a goth and a punk and a new romantic, all that kind of stuff. And the town had very fixed ideas around gender and masculinity. So then I wasn't that. Yeah. And the club that I used to go to was a club called Charlie's, where your town outsiders or your town freaks, so you're Black, you're queers, you're straights, you're skinheads, you're punks, this is where we would all gather. So then actually, for me, that was my world growing up. Most of us had to leave or run away in order to breathe. I was that kind of kid, reading all kinds of literature, fashion magazines, watching Top of the Pops and John Peel, and then just hearing all this kind of alternative music and sounds as well. That kid. And then a turning point was I created a magazine called Black Magazine in 1985. And there was a space in Leeds called the Roseville Centre, and then seeing a group called Turbo and seeing The Last Points. Yeah, and they played. Coming across Malcolm X for the first time, read that book. So then I was then this angry, young Black guy in this small town, saying, fuck you, blah, 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 blah. So then actually everything then just kind of started to change and shift from there. And then sexuality, I was straight, then bisexual, then gay, came down to London and then really embraced my gayness, then my queerness. So I'm kind of like, that's the journey. If you were born during that 1960s moment in the context of the UK, you was always told that you do not belong, that you are not English or you are not British, which means white. So then actually, for me as a youngster, there was always a sense of looking elsewhere for these things. Lots of us just pull and draw from everywhere to try and make sense of this thing, try and create all the ways of being or thinking. So then I was that kind of kid. And then in all of that, my family was always in my corner. I am always said that actually I could not be this out or this queer if my family, my siblings, my nieces and nephews were not in my corner from day one over the decades. And that means then actually that the rest of the world, I'm not sure if I should swear on the podcast.
No, you do you, be you, own you.
So basically, that means that a lot of the world can just fuck off. That post-punk moment is kind of what I still draw upon in terms of my politics, my way of thinking, my way of being. I'm Northern, and I just don't engage with lots of bullshit, basically. So then that's part of my backdrop. And then also then being a son of Jamaican parents, all of that, and then being Northern is in the mix. So that's why then the work, a lot of the early work looks and feels a particular way, even if some of those emotions or thinking does not appear in the work. It's the energy of the work. That is all of that stuff.
You kind of touched on some things, because I was always felt like an outsider for one reason or another. But and hearing about like you embraced different types of music, different types of styles. But fortunately, you had your family there who was always there supporting you, which blasts that myth that, at least in the States, we hear that Black people are more homophobic, which I always say that can't be possible when we're always a minority. I know that your family was there supporting, but how did you use those gifts and those tools to deal with maybe people on the outside who may have said that this is not how you should represent whatever label they want to put on you at the time?
If we believe in diversity and difference, that then has got to then be afforded to Black queers too. So then actually, just because we might experience racism, just because we might experience homophobia and transphobia with her, I don't always think that is enough for us to come together as a collective, blah, 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 blah. So then actually, for me, I'm not about difference. It's how do we respect those things that makes us different. Because actually sameness is boring. That's where we then bring these different gifts, different ways of thinking and being. That for me is kind of how it should be. I think that one of the challenges is that we sometimes within our Black queer politics forget that we are also individuals as well. There is a way of always framing our experiences, ways of being in the context of community, who is included in that narrative, and then who gets excluded, and then what kind of exclusions do Black queers also do to each other in the context of community or identity thinking. That's what part of my work questions. So then no. No.
Battling country club politics that I think we tend to adopt.
I think that there is a price that people pay irrespective of who they are by being different. That's not a weakness for me. That's where my power is by embracing what makes me different. And then basically, if then some folks then find that troubling for whatever reason, then there's questions that you need to ask yourself. That's not about me.
Whenever I'm challenged, I need to run it through my own filter, healthy filter. Why am I challenged?
Yes, every single time, yeah.
I hope it doesn't sound trite, but I think what I believe, I feel, for myself at least, that's a good example, the ways in which you are authentically yourself. If I can hear what you just shared, that can help me today, even though I may have assumed that I couldn't look at myself a different way.
Totally agree with that.
I want to mention a couple of your works and exhibitions so that people can know where to find these types of things. But I found last year your exhibition titled Ajamu, the Patron Saint of Darkrooms, or actually I think you sent that to me, which debuted at Autograph in London. I liked the write-up by the British Indian artist Bendu Vora. This is your quote: "I feel an important metaphorical resonance with this medium. The tonality, the depths of the image is alive, and such details opens a space for the viewer to encounter an important aspect of the print, the history of photography in relation to modern day Black, queer, and trans identities," which you've mentioned several times during this conversation. But for me, as the viewer of your work, as somebody who's learning who you are as an artist, I feel spirituality in that quote. Yeah.
I'm glad you do.
Yeah. And not in a religious sense, but just in the energy of it. Yeah.
I think for me, and there's one of the questions that's always missing in some of our politics is questions around beauty, aesthetics, once again, process, what is happening to and through our bodies in the context when we make work. I think that generally a lot of conversations start from the work, the photograph, but actually there is this whole other thing happening I kind of want to articulate so that the work does not get pulled down these very narrow cul-de-sacs and then get stuck. That's why I'm very much trying to articulate what I'm feeling in the context of making, printing, the smells, the light, the chemicals, the sound in the context of the dark room. There is something else happening in the encounter. The body is central to my work. It's not just the cultural, political body, it's the material body in the moment of making. My hunch is that we make work, first and foremost, is because it makes us feel good. It's because it brings some kind of pleasure. And then everything else comes after that. That's why I'm trying to articulate the step before people suck the image into all kinds of ways. I'm saying, actually, there is something that's happening when we as artists make work, right? I think that there is a difference when a writer uses a biro pen as opposed to a fountain pen. There is something that's happening. And so then that's what I'm grappling with when I make work or print work in the context of the darkroom. It's sensual.
As a creative, as a professional photographer, how is it for you when you see your work, when you have these exhibitions that have been showcased nationally in the UK and internationally in other countries? How is it for you? Or maybe a more direct question, how was it the first time that you, as a professional, how was it for you to see your work on display, to see people engaging with it and sensing the emotion, or maybe them sharing the emotions that they got from seeing your work?
The first time is always nerve-wracking, and the last time is always nerve-wracking. That's what comes with when you put work out into the world. One thing that I learned way back when is that if your work is about identity and sexuality and the work gets attacked for whatever reason, right, you feel that pain. Once the work is in the world, it is then theoretically no longer my work. There is always an excitement and nervousness when I show work. I want people not to think about the work. What I want is for people to sense the work. For me, that is a different level of engagement. The work has got to do something. It could be in the lighting of the work. It could be in the scale of the work. It could be the surface, the texture. There's something else that the work has got to evoke. That's why I'm still taking pictures 30 years on. There's this thing that I'm gesturing towards, that actually that the work has got to be very sensuous, but that sensuous is then no less political. It is no less philosophical, because then I then kind of move in between all of those three things and more. I love creating new work. I love thinking about new ideas. And then the beauty, I think, of having a long practice is that you can drill down into the work, all the ideas as you continue to and grow. Work I was doing in the 90s, it's still the same kind of ideas or themes, but actually I can now make it more sophisticated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Build on it.
And build on it and then drill down into it. Some people will get the work, right? Yeah. Some people won't. And then because the work is created by someone Black and queer, I am also aware that my work is not always for Black queer people too. Because actually, sometimes the work is just not for some people, and that's okay.
Again, to kind of make it personal for me, like one of your most intriguing works that I've seen is the one, and I think you kind of referenced it earlier, where showing the point of orgasm.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was seeing the whole image, but definitely the faces. For who I am up to this point in my life, that was the most intriguing, because I would imagine there's a vulnerability for the model to do that, and maybe on your end too. There was something beautiful in those images, and in some ways freeing, just as a viewer. seeing a lot of commonalities too.
That work, I have a theory that at the point of orgasm, what's put on hold is one's social construct around one's identity. And the body then enters another kind of a space. Yeah. It's this elsewhere space that I think that the body enters in that nanosecond. It's somewhere else. The body then enters through the sonic. What that work also throws up for me is the limits of the photograph, because actually it cannot capture the sonic. For me, there is one thing talking about sexuality and pleasure. Part of my work is trying to capture it and to hold it for that second, because then there is a kind of energy that the image then throws up. And then also then what it then does, it reminds some people of their experiences when they're in that moment of orgasm too. Unless you're being filmed in the moment of coming, most people don't actually know what their cum face look like. Most people are not aware of what their body does in that moment. I think that it's trying to hold those other things about that moment that we find ourselves in for a second or 2 seconds or what. So then that's what I'm trying to capture, is that energy. And the models were not vulnerable. It's because they know what kind of work I do already. I don't buy into that somehow folks come, they're vulnerable, I've taken an image and then they feel less vulnerable. In that moment, everybody was very much confident about being in that moment.
Did any of them share with you in detail, like what it was like? Because you said like most of us don't know how we look in that moment. Were they able to, and did they share with you how they process seeing themselves in that moment?
No, it's because I'm not necessarily interested in that psychological framing about after a moment, we'll talk about this or whatever. That's not my work. I am not saying that people might not have those conversations internally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would never instigate that conversation because that's not where the work was coming from.
I just lost my train of thought.
Fine.
Which is good. I was so much in the moment.
Good.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea.
Yeah, right.
It was a challenge to be in the moment. I think it's hard to be in the here and the now because we're always in the past or the future. And the challenge also actually, going back to technology, we are so caught up in noise and distraction and technology. It pulls us out of the moment. So then, once again, I think it's hard to just be in the moment now just because there's so much things vying for our attention.
Have you been able, through your work, to discover how it's moving the needle forward for us Black queer citizens and how we see ourselves sexually or embrace our sexuality more honestly?
That's not my work. My work is to present another way of thinking or being, and sometimes it is in opposition to Black queer thinking and work. Anyway.
Okay.
So basically, my work is to create very political, provocative, sensuous imagery to have other kinds of conversations around the body and sensuality and intimacy. Hopefully, people will take it up, question it, challenge it, dismiss it. All that is fine, because then that's what comes with being an artist. If we're talking about Black queers, I think it's how people own their Black queerness that might be different to other Black queers. And that's fine.
I saw a billboard. What is your Black queerness?
What is your Black queerness?
Yeah.
I agree. The work has got to be challenging to Black folks and queer folks as well. If not, I wouldn't be excited just by creating work just for Black queers, whether it's about the ideas that I'm more excited by. That's what I want the work to do, isn't just to throw up other kinds of questions, other ways of thinking, other way of being. A lot of the early work, a lot of the challenges came from Black queers. It's because the work was not seen as positive representation. I'm saying that the work does what it does also.
There's always conversations.
There's always conversations, and some are interesting. I actually have no qualm saying some just doesn't float my boat, and that's okay. Not everything that's Black and queer is for my Black queer ass neither, and that's fine.
Yeah, I love that. Wow. I said it in the intro, and I think it came to pass that I feel like I've learned something. So I want to really thank you for coming onto this platform, encouraging me to continue to look at the ways that I could look for my own Black queer authenticity. So thank you for that. And I always end by asking if you have any final thoughts or insights.
More pleasure, more pleasure, more pleasure.
There you go.
And have fun, live your life, and then more pleasure. That's it.
It's a great way to wrap it up. Thank you. And where can we engage with you online?
On my IG account, Ajamu Studios, and my website is ajamu-studio.com.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.